agronomy, agriculture, land, crops. That's something that people can wrap their heads around. Rolling up farms, growing something at scale. You still have an asset that you can touch and feel and that's producing something. The US audience has been conditioned for so many years to associate Colombia and coffee. The initial idea was we're going to buy a bunch of farms, realize economies of scale, add some sustainability components to the business. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a pool of assets that are sitting there to backstop any craziness that could happen. So very real estate-like.
Welcome to the Path to Passive podcast, where we talk about building wealth and empowering lifestyle through commercial real estate investing for tech professionals. I always wish that other tech professionals reaching financial freedom had documented their journey along the way, so I'm doing it for the rest of us. Join us as we explore stories, many failures, and lessons learned along the way. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. All right, Adam, Jason, Ben, good to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about something that isn't the multifamily, the self-storage, that kind of stuff, but we have you here as the co-CEO of Green Coffee Company, and you've got a pretty cool background, right? Former Wall Street attorney, you're leader of Colombia's largest coffee producer now. We're going to dive into that, which is pretty cool. In the last 3 to 4 years, you've really gotten to do that play of that roll-ups or aggregation, as you would, in that space. And it's really cool to see how you're been pioneering this whole idea of farm to cup model. So appreciate you being here, Adam.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. For those just, getting to hear about this for the first time or from you, please introduce yourself, and then we'll dive into why are we talking about Green Coffee Company here?
Sure. So I'm talking to you today from Medellín, Colombia, a long way from Buffalo, New York, where I grew up. You mentioned some of my background. Attorney by trade, practiced at a couple of large law firms in the U.S. My clients were Fortune 500 companies and Wall Street investment banks who specialized in IPOs and raising capital on the public and private markets. And I reached a point in my career, probably about 8 years into being an attorney, where I wanted to explore something new. Found Medellín, Colombia on a vacation, kind of a whim, a twist of fate. Ended up meeting my business partner, and I made the leap here full time in January of 2018. So it's been about 8 years now that I've been primarily in Colombia, but I also share my time between here and our U.S. Chicago headquarters for the business as we've been continuing to grow and expand.
Yeah, nice. And if I remember correctly, I was listening to you on a different podcast. I think it was the Passive Pockets one. You were talking about it was somewhere around 7 to 10 years being at firms. You're either join one of the client firms, or it might be doing a partner. You had taken like a month off to go traveling, and Colombia made sense to you. And so that's kind of what you found as the opportunity then.
That's right. Yeah, every attorney, maybe white collar profession, I think, reaches at some point a fork in the road of what's next. And you go through the early development years and starting to build a career. And then in the law firm world, at least, it's a decision between, do you stay at the firm and become a partner? Do you go in-house at a client that you represent? Or do you do something totally different? And just nature of my background and things I had never really done too much traveling growing up, not a lot of international exploration, and had a job offer in Houston that gave me a month between there, and I was in Dallas at the time, and just decided to come down here, check it out, relax a little bit, spend some time in one place and see what it might be like to live in a different country for a month. And just kind of fell in love with it, saw the opportunity that was out there. We had an early contingency of really multifamily and real estate investors that we connected with down here that gave us the chance to look at some business opportunities and bring in some capital from the U.S. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things that you would never think to plan for. Probably never for the first, 30 years of my life, didn't even know where Colombia was. And then the next chunk of life from 32 to 40, I've been here. So it's just a weird path, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, an adventure, right?
An adventure, for sure.
So what happened to that job in Houston?
I was here in Colombia. I spent the month here, and then I went back to Houston and started the job. I ended up spending about 10 months there. during that time, in my free time, my business partner in the green coffee company was jump-starting the business and looking to raise the first round of capital. So in my free time, nights, weekends, etc., I was helping him to plan, given my experience as a securities attorney and raising money in the US, helping him plan and do the work to raise the initial round of capital for the business. So even though the business is here in Colombia, we started by working with US high net worth investors who were interested in ag, or actually something that looked and felt like real estate here in Colombia that they could wrap their heads around. So when you do that, even though the operations and farms are here in Colombia, all the same rules and regulations with respect to capital raising and what you have to do in terms of SEC compliance, it's all the same. So my background was applicable.
Got it. That makes sense. I want to dive into that in next, but I'm curious. You talked about working with high net worth clients. You talked about being in the capital markets. What just kind of round that out for us. What are some of the other things that you did in those roles? I think advising on IPOs is one of them too, right?
That's right. Yes, like we did the IPO, for example, for Yeti Coolers, a business that started out as two brothers who wanted to keep their beer colder longer when they were going fishing. That evolution of call it a family business into being ready for the public markets in the US is pretty demanding. To make sure you have the right team in place, can meet the right reporting requirements. Of course, there's financial metrics that institutional investors will look for, registering with the exchanges, reserving a ticker symbol, making all the functionality of an IPO work, having the right governance in place. And it becomes more demanding in terms of who you have on your board of directors and the people that are around the company. So doing a lot of that work for a host of companies. And then a lot of our clients, I was actually based for the substantial early portion of my career in Cleveland. We had a lot of historical, let's call it generations old clients. So Sherwin-Williams, metals companies, a lot of those old Midwest firms that people would know. So a lot of that was helping them maintain their compliance with ongoing reporting requirements, raising new money. And then we also did a lot of work in the early days for companies focused on rare earth metals. So these are the metals that would go into cell phones, technology. Probably interesting to your audience. It's very much a market that's controlled by China. So they control about 95% of the rare earth materials that are used in these new forms of technology. So managing companies that were trying to compete with them in the US and open up these new mines, a whole host of industries, which was exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really conducive to that experience is really transferable, say, to that international mindset. Even though you may not have traveled, it was like, oh, I see how all this is directly applicable to what you're doing now.
Sure.
Let's talk a little about that, right? You're down there for a month. How did you stumble into this coffee thing? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. My now business partner started the company. We started building it together. We connected. We had a group, as I mentioned, of real estate investors that he was connected with from the US who had already found Colombia, whether it was because they traveled here on their own or they were interested in emerging market or developing market experiences, wanted to get some diversification away from the US or the public stock markets or even real estate within the US, or maybe just folks with a little bit of international interest or flavor. And they had been investing in Colombia for, let's say, 5 to 10 years and started to get itchy for a new kind of project, but also something that wasn't too far afield from real estate. So we thought, okay, agronomy, agriculture, land, crops, that's something that people can wrap their heads around. Rolling up farms, growing something at scale. You still have an asset that you can touch and feel and that's producing something. And then, of course, the US audience has been conditioned for so many years to associate Colombia and coffee. So it was a fairly easy thesis for investors to wrap their heads around. The initial idea was we're going to buy a bunch of farms, realize economies of scale, add some sustainability components to the business, try and sell further down the value chain than
Yep.
other folks currently have. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a pool of assets that are sitting there to backstop any craziness that could happen. So very real estate like.
Yeah, most definitely. So it sounds like you had a group of people already. I mean, through networking, through as it goes, I mean, professional life, like this looks like an opportunity. Did that influence your decision too on traveling there for that quote unquote month off?
That was my decision to travel was independent. Go out and think about what's next for myself, and it just
Yeah.
happened to overlap with finding the opportunity.
Cool. Serendipity. Gotta love it, right?
Serendipity. Yeah. Yeah. You said in one word what I said in 20. So thank you.
It's all good. So this is interesting. And I want you to talk more about this. So we're kind of shifting from your background to how the skills you picked up in professional life, also kind of the think to really pivot to this space as well, seeing the opportunity and really taking the opportunity. But let's talk about this asset, right? Like you said, you had some people that were some of your initial investors, which I'm sure they're still part of the network and connected and so forth, but they're familiar with real estate. It wasn't just multifamily, not just, as I mentioned earlier, not just the self-storage mobile home parks, whatever. It was something tangible that you could still invest in. But this is, as we say, a business, agribusiness, right? And so many people are familiar with investing in things like real estate versus quote unquote investing in businesses probably would be like the stock market, but instead of investing in businesses from a private perspective. So talk about the coffee company as a business. And like you said, people are familiar with Colombian coffee. Yes, we don't have to train them for that, but talk about what this quote unquote value chain looks like from that customer.
Sure. So we initially intended it to really be an alternative to real estate, consolidate assets, yield it out. But as we got into the industry more and more, of course, I'm not from Colombia, my business partner is, and had to get to know the market and the industry. And we're Americans coming in as outsiders.
Totally.
What we saw is people who you would think would be here, Starbucks, Nestle, the big names that people know in coffee, they don't go to the farming level. They're not operating at origin. They're not picking their own coffee. All the coffee that they source goes through multiple hands of middlemen, whether it's importers, exporters, traders, what have you, global commodity market participants. So we saw an opportunity to tell a different story around coffee that really included us being the farmers ourselves. Not myself personally, of course, I'm sitting in an executive role at the business, but as a company as a whole, we saw that as a unique way to provide value to our end consumers, being able to trace the coffee literally to the exact farm where it was grown, operate in a sustainable way. We're talking about carbon positive operations, using regenerative agriculture, narrowing the gap in terms of inequality for females and the role that they play in the company. All these new and different ideas that were not historically present in Colombian coffee. It's very much a family business. About 95% of all the farming operations in Colombia are, let's call it 5 acres or less. The normal story is great granddad, grandpa buys a farm. They live next to the uncles. The uncles get a little more land. They put it together. The cousins come in. They start building a little bit of a farm asset. And then as it passes through the generations, there's always a point in time that we found where somebody says, look, I really want to do something else. I don't want to be a coffee farmer in Colombia. But what they find is a lot of their family's net worth is tied up in that asset.
Yep.
And it's not, for example, like a piece of commercial real estate in Miami where you can go to the bank and refinance and tap into the equity. Basically have to sell it or it's just going to sit there as a store of value, but you have no liquidity around it. It's just the nature of kind of the capital markets here too in Colombia, which is another reason why we've used outside capital primarily to grow the business. So as we saw that generational turnover and the opportunity there, we started buying at scale. Today, we're the largest producer of coffee in Colombia. We have 10,000 acres, about 10 million coffee trees. We've deployed a little over $100 million, all of which we've raised from high net worth investors in the US, like as you mentioned, that are interested in private market investing, but also where the risk reward profile is interesting to them.
Yeah.
Our goal as a company is to get to an IPO in the US, so list on one of the major stock exchanges. And to your point about being a business, is as compared to most real estate, not all, because there can be huge jumps in value. A business, you kind of take the roof off of the potential upside that you might have in real estate, for example. You're not going to probably get the same level of multiples in a commercial real estate project that you would get in a business. So for the investors, I think it was attractive where they say, look, there's a lot of upside here. But at the end of the day, as we started with, there's a pool of $100 million of assets that's sitting there that worst case scenario, these guys have to sell off and return the money to investors. So kind of a best of both worlds scenario.
Yeah, certainly. That's, what did you say, $100 million raised so far, and what, 10 million, how many trees?
10 million trees.
10 million trees. I'm like, is that right? That is a lot.
Yeah, that's right. It's a lot. It's a lot of coffee.
That is. How many acres does that come out to?
About 10,000.
Okay, 10,000. Wow, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. And from the market perspective, everyone drinks coffee. I got coffee next to me. I'm drinking out of a Yeti cup. Cool story.
There you go.
Here in Austin, so kind of full circle there.
Oh yeah.
Everyone's drinking coffee. It's a market that people are familiar with it. They're going to be familiar with it. It's not going away. What's the positioning on this? Is going to what, certain stores? Are you trying to go direct to customer? What's the think there?
We have two channels that we sell into. One of them is private label wholesale food service. So think about restaurant groups, casinos, cruise lines, hotels, basically anywhere coffee served.
Yeah.
We sell into those customers using our green coffee company name and story. A good example, A recent client that we acquired is Carnival Cruises. That's a company that faces pressure, as many do now, in terms of the sustainability of their supply chain. You could think about the amount of garbage and things that a cruise line would produce and the pressure from public market investors, their own internal metrics around carbon neutral or what it might be by a certain period. And they said, look, the more we can have supply chain partners who help us get to our own goals, the better.
Yes.
So when they talk to us about, as I mentioned, carbon positive farming, where we're actually capturing more carbon than we emit every year, or the regenerative agriculture, the story around females in the workforce, all of these aspects of our story become marketing stories for our customers. So that's a big channel for us. And then we also, if you recall from years ago, the Juan Valdez commercials that were published in the US and the appearance in Bruce Almighty and Saturday Night Live, it's probably the most recognized Colombian coffee brand ever. About $1.4 billion has been invested in the brand and in marketing in the US alone over the years. In 2025, we got the exclusive rights to the brand for the US and Canada for sales through retail and institutional channels.
Exclusive brand for what?
For Juan Valdez.
Okay, got it. Nice.
So we use the brand. We put our coffee from our farms in the products. We have a full range of products from bag coffees to pods and capsules and ready to drink cold brew beverages. It's just another way for us to distribute our product. But if you go to the supermarket and see Juan Valdez, you're buying coffee that came from our farms. Starting in 2025, when we got the rights to the brand, we've launched in about just over 1,000 new doors. D'Agostino's, Rally's, Target, Harris Teeter. And we have another 1,500 coming. We just got a big deal with Walgreens for 1,400 stores. So the products will be back out in the market in a pretty big way in the near term here in a couple thousand doors.
Congratulations. And it's also very funny to hear that as you've entered into stores, these are quote unquote doors. It's like doors.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
similar to real estate.
Yeah. It's a funny perspective on it, but nonetheless, the channel quote unquote angle. You had mentioned this stat before, and I always want to make sure that we're dropping these to kind of find these relevant but interesting kind of tidbits along the way. How many cups of coffee every day does the U.S. consume, or is it world? I think it was like 2 million or something.
In the world, it's about 2 billion.
Billion.
Yeah,
Wow.
the U.S. alone. This always surprises me, but the stat is that in the last 2 days, 67% of all Americans have had coffee, which is actually a higher percentage than the number of people who have had just a simple glass of water, which is always so strange. I can't imagine drinking. I love coffee, of course, but I don't know how people don't have a glass of water at some point. But that's a while. This was not all totally planned, but we found ourselves in a unique business. I think it's fairly, let's call it recession-proof. People are going to drink coffee continuously. They may upgrade or downgrade depending on what's going on in the economy. Now, especially for your audience, it's not a business that is going to be AI disrupted. It's still farming. It's still a physical product that people are going to consume. So we feel bullish about the future of the business, and the consumption globally just continues to grow every year.
Certainly. I mean, from a market perspective, like we've been talking about here, there's a lot of demand. There's going to be continued demand, et cetera. Again, you have the distribution channels that you've talked about, including Carnival Cruises, Walgreens, Target, so forth. That's great. That's pretty cool. Like, moves are being made, obviously. And the scale really helps with the stability of the business as well, right? The number of trees, 100 million trees, which is still
10 million.
10 million, excuse me, which is just like 10 or 100 million trees, right? But and continuing to grow, I'm sure. So with everything, all these pros, you talked about, there's returns, but we also have risk, right? So what are some of the headwinds on here? People want to underwrite, think about this as plug it into a model, plug it into now their favorite AI. Like, all right, what needs to happen here, right? So what are some of the downsides or not downsides, risk factors in a model like this for business?
One of the challenges of operating at that kind of scale would be similar, I think, to what you'd see in real estate. The farms that we bought, because of the nature of the industry, where it's very fragmented, we couldn't buy them all in huge clusters, all in one conveniently fenced-in location. Right? We're basically farming on the sides of mountains, and there is a little bit of separation from one farming group to the other. We've tried to limit that and buy farms that are well grouped, but inevitably you have to buy in various regions. And in one way, it helps from a diversification standpoint, but also it does create challenges in terms of operations. Right? We have, when I say mountains, these can be 90-degree inclines where people are out in the middle of the day picking coffee and that you can't automate. Wow. So all the coffee from Colombia has been hand-picked, which means you have a huge labor force out in the field. People could be doing God knows what. They can be picking various levels of quality. So it's a lot of people management that is challenging for us. Fortunately, we have good people on the ground here in Colombia, people that have been in the industry forever that manage the agronomical piece of the business, but that's just one example of the challenges. And then early on in the business, just adapting to a different culture, of course, learning the language, finding the resources, raising capital is a big part of the job that we've had over the last few years to make sure we could afford, much of which is kind of an upfront investment, the talent that we needed to be able to realize the vision of the business. We've been on the entrepreneurial roller coaster. That's for sure. It's not all highs every day. That's something I can confirm.
Yes. Of course, weather is another one. Is local policies and laws. I mean, Colombian coffee is a thing all on its own. So it's a big import export thing for the country, no doubt as well, right? Is that something that has to be navigated a lot?
Climate was important. It's a long-term risk factor for the sector as a whole.
Mhm.
As the temperature warms, you inevitably have to go higher and higher up the mountains to grow coffee at the temperatures at which it can really produce.
Okay.
We saw this coming a little bit when we were doing the farm acquisitions that we have, making sure we're acquiring farms that had adequate elevation.
Mhm.
The scientific research shows that really you want to be at about 1,400 meters above sea level. That gives you a good level of protection. Below that, there's enough warming going on that it can impact production. I think we're okay. It's probably a 2050 concern versus a 2026 concern, the climate. Of course, we get natural cyclical weather patterns, whether it be more rain this year or more sun next year, that can have an impact on coffee harvest, just as it would any crop that's grown outdoors. We have to plan for that, and we're starting to recognize patterns and how that can impact our overall production figures. That's something we work through. And then the local politics, they can be challenging. We've gone through both right wing administrations, left wing administrations. The one thread line for both sides of the aisle is coffee in Colombia is the national product. It's an industry that's protected. It also is a huge job generator for what are traditionally rural, poor communities
Yep.
that would otherwise probably have to exist in some form of government benefit system, which Colombia doesn't really have the same kind of infrastructure around that you'd have in the US. So where we come in and we provide a lot of jobs, and then often in the communities we're in, we're the largest employer. People see hospitals going up, real estate values improving, roads
Yep.
getting built because of additional tax dollars. It'd be very tough for either side of the political aisle to really make us a target for something, because it would have such a downstream impact on the people that really need to have investment in these communities that have traditionally been underinvested or not invested in at all. So we feel pretty good about that from a political standpoint.
Cool.
But it creates
Right on.
issues around taxes and how much are we paying every year for those kind of things. So additional regulations come when there's a left-wing government and those kind of things. The same challenges that U.S. companies go through between Republicans and Democrats, and who's setting the rules.
Yeah, certainly. Curious, right? Again, this is investing from U.S. investors over to Colombia. You've got quite a bit of capital raised already, but the idea of investing in a U.S. company that just has its operations in Colombia, or is there something that has to be considered from an international perspective?
Exactly. We knew that to attract U.S. investors, the structure itself had to be U.S. domiciled. So our company is a U.S. Delaware formed LLC, taxed as a C corp. Any investment comes into the Delaware holding company. So all the banking is done in the U.S. All the legal structure is in line with U.S. law and regulation. Had to be familiar for investors and give them the comfort around that aspect. Also to position us for our goals as a future public company in the U.S., it helps to have a U.S. structure versus the Colombia only focus. So we have a Delaware holding company, and then it has two U.S. subsidiaries, and then two Colombian, subsidiaries that own and operate our assets in Colombia, but everything flows up through the U.S. where the investors sit.
Got it. Okay, cool. So investors would be investing in U.S. company. Perfect.
Yes.
Can you shed any light on what the investment looks like. And no returns are guaranteed, no investment is guaranteed, none of that kind of stuff. But people have generally a good idea of what they might sort of be getting in today's market for an investment on multifamily or mobile home parks, et cetera. What can you talk about from that perspective?
Well, we're raising a little bit of capital right now. We have all of these new clients coming on board in the US, which is requiring us to have additional working capital, primarily to finance inventory. So if you think about the timeline for us, we take the coffee off the trees, we have to process it in Colombia, get it to the US, sell it to customers, and then often retailers, for example, will have anywhere from 60 to 90 days to pay. So from the time we spend all the money to get the coffee off the trees and through the process is about 120 days. So it does tie up capital for us for a while. And our biggest hurdle right now or challenge is making sure that on these new wins with these large customers that we deliver and execute, because you don't get a lot of second chances with the names that we were talking about. So we're open for investment for anybody listening. Right now, we're focused on high net worth accredited investors in the US, so people who meet that accredited investor definition, which many are likely familiar with from the real estate investing world. We're looking for $100,000 investments and up. That's traditionally been our minimum. Anybody who's interested could find me. The easiest way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me right there. But our goal is we want to get the company to a public market, NYSE, NASDAQ in the US within the next 18 months. We're raising at a valuation that we think, if we execute effectively, would mean a return for investors in the 3 to 4 times their money range. Again, as a projection, as you mentioned, nothing's guaranteed, but that's what we're focused on.
Cool. Over what time range are you thinking? Through like up to IPO, or what's the return timeline?
Yeah, this would be 18 months would be the goal to get the company public, and then people can start realizing the upside of their investment after that.
Got it. If they want to stay in, type of thing.
If they want to sell, then they could take their return, or if they want to sell some and hold a balance, or if they want to hold it all or buy more. Just basically our objective is to give investors the liquidity option that they would need to make their own decision around what's right for them. But the idea is, if you put in $1 now, that when we get to this stage, each dollar you put in now is worth $4. Let's say $3 to $4 of value on a projected basis.
Totally. So this really is a pre-IPO opportunity then.
It is. Yeah, we think it's exciting. And a lot of investors, especially the individual investors, are left out of many of the pre-IPO opportunities. I don't know a lot of people, for example, that are getting to buy shares in OpenAI or SpaceX or some of the companies that are on the cusp of going public. So we want to try and do something unique for investors who want to be able to participate at that stage and be involved in what should be a pretty cool process for us over the next 18 months.
Cool. I'm curious, is there any other characteristics, attributes you can talk about? Like, maybe we can just talk about this for a minute or two about what are some of the characteristics of a pre-IPO company. Obviously, it makes sense. It's pre-IPO. But anything else that you can, having this be in your background, talk about what else people should be thinking about when you're looking at a company?
Sure. Well, of course, you want to see growth, right? We've grown from 1 million of sales to up to 26 million of sales with a new client book that's coming online. You can see the potential in terms of the names that we're adding to the roster. Obviously, that the foundations are in place. Like, you need audited financials. You got to have all the check the box necessary to become a public company. But essentially, it's basically, am I investing in a company that I think a lot of other people will be interested in the future, right? Because of the growth, because of the client list, because of the uniqueness of the business. If you can get excited about it, probably other folks in the future are likely to as well. And then just does the valuation make sense?
Yeah. And from that perspective too, pre-IPO companies, I guess not necessarily, but typically have less debt than equity. Is that right?
That would be, especially in the tech space,
Mhm.
right? A lot of the tech companies are going to be at negative earnings, which make it really hard to get that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking as well. All right,
Hmm.
cool. One of the things I thought was kind of cool as we taper off from that core conversation is something else that you're doing. We could have talked about earlier from the market, et cetera, but I wanted to keep it kind of distinct. I was curious, you're doing the coffee, but there is also a byproduct, right, that you're turning into alcohol. I was curious, well, first of all, if you could talk a little about that, what's being done, how you saw that opportunity, but also, is this something that has been done already? Or is this kind of new to the world of Colombia? Because I've never heard of it's what gin you're making from the byproduct, right?
Yeah, you can make gins, vodkas. We have, when you go and harvest coffee, as I mentioned, we have to hand pick it off the tree. It really grows in a cherry format.
Mm-hmm.
And the bean is what we consume as coffee. When you separate that bean, you're also left over with the skin, mucilage, pulp, everything like a normal piece of fruit. And as we've grown and the scale of the business has escalated, sometimes we're at the farms and our processing facilities, and you're just seeing these mountains of this cherry leftover product.
Yeah,
So we asked ourselves a couple of years ago, what can we do with this? Right? It actually
totally.
has a negative cost for the business. We have to dispose of it appropriately so that it doesn't become a pollutant.
Mm-hmm.
How do we turn this into revenue?
Mm-hmm.
And what we found through various scientific studies and partnerships that we've done primarily here in Colombia is that fruit, like many other fruits, has a lot of sugar in it.
Yep.
When you have sugar, you can basically turn any kind of sugar, any source of sugar, into ethanol. So we
Mm-hmm.
started testing the extraction process, the distillation process. We have a test distillery at our facilities now that does small scale. It's about 10 liters of ethanol per day. But that we could turn all that cherry byproduct into a mash and then run it through the distillation product process, and then you're left with pure ethanol at the end. That is pure ethanol diluted is vodka. But then
Mm-hmm.
it could also be used as a raw material. Gin is just pure ethanol, but then with flavonoids added to it in
Mm-hmm.
the process. That becomes the base for liquor for human consumption, but it can
Yep.
also be used in energy production.
Yep.
It can be used commercial grade. It can be used for medical grade applications. So as we continue to scale up the business, one of the big next steps for where we want to go is to also ramp up our ability to process all of that coffee cherry. This few years have been in the, let's call it the testing phase,
Yep.
figuring out how it would work at scale. As we raise additional money and our sales continue to go up, we're expecting to build another facility here in Colombia that would do about 12,000 liters of pure ethanol per day at full production. So
Yeah.
that'll be a big next step for the business and a big revenue boost to the company and, of course, to our investors.
Yeah, most definitely. So coming back to that question, is this something that's been like done already, or is this new for the byproduct conversion and usage?
It's been studied before. It's been done at a very small scale. There's actually a company in the U.S. that sells the vodka from coffee cherry. They don't make it themselves. They buy the raw materials and then bring them into the U.S. But it's a very small scale operation. Nobody's really done this at a commercial level before.
Doesn't that kind of blow your mind? Like we were talking about earlier, these big brand names don't come in and they're not buying farms at the, well, farm level, right? And so that was a surprise for you, which helped you get to the biggest company there. But similar to this, it's like, well, we have sawdust. We should do something with the sawdust, right?
Right.
And so, isn't this like a huge surprise to you?
People should be doing it. It does surprise me that nobody's really thought about it. It does require, unlike sawdust, for example, which doesn't rot, at least very quickly, you have the rotting challenge in Colombia or in coffee. So you separate just think about a normal piece of fruit, right? You open it and it immediately starts to go bad. You
Right.
leave an apple outside for an hour and it goes brown. You have the same thing with the fruit where you basically have to control the whole process because you have a limited window. It's called 24 to 36 hours from the time that you separate the bean from the cherry to do something with it, or it is officially garbage.
Yeah.
So it really requires that full
Having a tighter operation, so to speak, all through and through. Yeah, I just meant more of that perspective of the quote unquote, like if you're going to the byproduct, if you're going to be doing something with trees as an example, like take every piece that you can. But nonetheless.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Sounds like a great opportunity. Listen, I know we had to close up here. We covered a bunch of stuff. The 2 billion cups of coffee a day, 67% of Americans in the last like 2 days or something. You said that people have had that cup, to what you and your partners have identified as that opportunity to grow into 100 million trees. I got it right this time, which is pretty outstanding. And talking about the upside as well as potential risks and so forth. So this has been a lot of fun to have you here, Adam. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention? Please also mention where people can find you. Again, you said LinkedIn, but any other places to learn more as well.
Sure. If people want to learn more about the company, it's greencoffeecompany.com. For anybody who's interested in the investment opportunity, the best is just to find me on LinkedIn, and I'll connect you with our investor relations team and get you all of the information around the investment, the prospectus, and those kind of documents that you traditionally see.
Awesome. Adam, thanks so much for being here. See you.
Thank you, Steven.
Take care.
Appreciate it. You too. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Path to Passive. We love connecting with our listeners and those on the path to architecting their wealth and improving their lives. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future episodes. Get in touch with us through email or Instagram. See you next week for a new episode.